Good morning. Good to see everyone. I'm going to talk about water-soluble formulations. So, water-soluble cannabis, other bioactives like kratom, piperin, lots of things that don't like to dissolve in water. I'm going to talk about how you could make them water-soluble and why you would want to. So, everyone knows, especially in this crowd, right, that cannabis has lots of ways that you can administer it. So people use their lungs, so the pulmonary delivery where you can vape it or smoke it. You could have an edible. You could put it under your tongue, or other transmucosal routes exist, like intranasal, even rectal exists. Or you could try to deliver it into the bloodstream through your skin, which is transdermal, not to be confused with topical, because topical is for treating the skin condition and transdermal intends to go all the way into the blood. So all these methods exist together. And well, the question is why? Why do you need to use your lungs? It's not everybody likes to do it. There's some advantages to it. You can titrate your dose. It's quick to act, but it's harsh, and it is associated with all kinds of risks. Your lungs are not meant to protect you from things that don't belong in your body. They're for oxygen. They're not for bioactive compounds. Your digestive system, on the other hand, has all kinds of checks and balances, and so an edible route, an oral digestive route, is also popular. It has advantages in the sense that it's more discreet and it protects you from bad formulations, let's say. But it's extremely slow. It's very smeared. So advantages and disadvantages to each one. Transmucosal is also it's a little it's a little unnatural to put things under your tongue if you just want to. If it's not exactly medicine, especially for recreative activities, right? Plus, bioavailability is very dependent on the way you did it. You typically think you have things under your tongue, but in reality, the stream of saliva is washing it down, so it crosses into digestive routes. So it's really not very reproducible to do it that way. And transdermal simply is very minor. The bioavailability is super low. Almost nothing gets into your bloodstream. So the question is, why are there so many routes? Why isn't there just one route? Like with alcohol, you don't have all these different routes. Like you could vape it if you wanted to, but why would you want to? You could put it under your tongue, but I mean, you might as well just, have a drink, right? So the question I'd like to explore is, would this all be happening, all these methods at the same time, if cannabis and its extracts were water soluble? Alcohol is water soluble and you don't see it, so you can just have a drink. So the argument I'd like to make is that this is where it's all going as soon as the technology and the understanding of the industry of what this is and why you would want that. Pending that becoming more common and more worked out, I believe that most of cannabis is going to end up being consumed in this way. Oral digestive, but as a beverage. And in the case of alcohol, it acts quickly. It's very reproducible. It basically combines all the advantages of all the typical methods without the disadvantages. And that's because it's water soluble. So at this point, I think most people know that you can make it water soluble, and I'll focus on exactly this. So in this particular case, there are a couple of samples that we made at our facility. This is a 40 milligram per gram CBD powder, water soluble. So you can take a dose. In this case, it's quarter gram for 10 milligrams, if that's what you consider to be a dose, which most people do. So you put it in. You can't really see it in this contrast, but it goes clear. Maybe there's a slight haze to it, but it dissolves completely. And in this case, it's a liquid, which is even simpler. It's already in water. So this is a nanoemulsion, 20 milligrams per milliliter of CBD. Same could be with THC, same could be with any cannabinoids or other bioactives if you manage to formulate them. The concentrate itself is translucent. With better contrast from the projector, you could see kind of through this, and there's a dropper in there. But once you dose it, it goes completely clear. So this is already possible, already doable. And I'm going to talk about how, well, anyone who wants to do this could just make their own without having to be a scientist, engineer, or whatever. So you can focus on the beverage and what you would do with it and not on how to make it happen. To understand in principle how this works, we have to get through this one concept of what a surfactant is. So I'm not going to talk a lot in chemistry terms, but a surfactant is something that I need to mention. So a surfactant is a surface active agent. It consists of basically two things. One is something that dissolves in water. So this is a type of sugar that by itself would be water soluble, like many sugar derivatives and sugar itself, right? This is basically an oil. And if you fuse them together, you get this entity with its head that likes to dissolve in water and with its tail that doesn't dissolve in water and would prefer to be in oil. Like typically dissolves like. It's a very general chemistry rule that is mostly true. So it's a combination molecule that has a hydrophilic and hydrophobic ends to it. We're gonna schematically just show it like this. Now, everyone knows that if you put oil and water together and stir it, no matter how much you stir it or for how long you stir it and what you stir it with, you may temporarily get some mixture that if you just leave it alone, and in a few minutes it'll separate out completely, right? But if you have surfactant present in this mixture, the heads of the surfactant would like to be in water, so they point and kind of dissolve in water. The tails prefer oil, so they would be in the oil. And so now if you look at this situation from the water's perspective, you're going to see friendly tails, and that's your interface. You don't actually see the oil. From the oil's perspective, you see friendly heads. These are typically, well, you have to choose, I guess, so these are going to be heads and those are tails. So the heads are in the water, the tails would be in the oil, and so now this interface is not a hostile situation. The oil is happy, water is happy, to put it simply. Which basically means that now you can put curvature on it, because interfaces like to be minimized as far as their area when they're unhappy. That's why you have surface tension on water. That's why raindrops are round, because for the given volume, the smallest surface any shape can have is when it's a sphere. Well, they have a little tail because they're falling, but if you let, sorry, okay, is it not? You can't hear that? One. Better? Oh yeah, okay. All right, wireless technology didn't survive this test. Yeah. For this situation, you could now make droplets, which, if you had this all stirred and you make a lot of droplets, the cumulative surface area at the interface would be much larger. This is how the surface is minimized, when it's just one layer on top of the other. But because surfactants kind of remove that problem, it's not such a big deal anymore for the system. The energy doesn't go up when you do it so much. So now you can make a nanoemulsion or an emulsion, okay? So that's why surfactants allow you to formulate, but they also allow you to wash your hands. Water wouldn't take the greasy, stuff off your hands, but soap is a surfactant. And so soap makes it possible for oils to kind of behave as if they were somewhat water soluble. So you can use water to wash your oily hands, right? Okay, so now that we know this, what can we do? Well, we can just have our oils which are cannabinoids, let's say, dissolved maybe in a carrier oil, you could now formulate. So the simplest type of oil and water formulation is a macroemulsion. Macroemulsion is if you just take oil, water, surfactant, stir it up, or maybe use something more sophisticated, but not anything super sophisticated. And then you'll get this milky kind of substance. Well, milk is actually a macroemulsion. Salad dressings are macroemulsions, lots of things like that. But for the purposes of what we're trying to achieve here in the cannabis industry, it doesn't really help you because these are unstable. If you leave this alone, it'll separate. Not as quickly as if you didn't have anything in it, like surfactant, but it'll separate in a matter of, well, maybe hours, depending on what it is exactly. Now, it also doesn't improve the bioavailability. It doesn't really shorten the onset of action when you do it this way. It's basically an edible, and it behaves like an edible that you somehow manage to put into a beverage temporarily. And that's why many products made like this that are not good enough, the potency testing is all over because it separates, and if you took your sample from a place where it didn't separate too, then you have nothing, and then let's say you take it at the surface where all the oil is going to float, and now you have a crazy, THC dose in your beverage. So, not the right way to do it. So we're not going to consider them further in this talk. Am I still quiet? Okay. Oh, am I waiting?
Test 1, 2.
I feel like I'm shopping for a mic. I've tried like 4 of them on. Is this better? What was wrong with that? Let's come back to the previous.
Go back to this one?
Yeah, this was fine.
You sure?
Everybody liked it, right? Is that your vote? All right.
So old school.
Yeah, old school's fine.
Test 1, 2.
Yeah, just maybe up a little bit.
Good?
Can you turn it up just a bit?
Try.
Yeah. How's this? Better? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the speaker's on that side, you guys are on this side, but I think it's going to make it. Okay. The other type of formulation that is common, less so these days, but used to be very common, mainly used by the pharmaceutical industry, is a microemulsion. Microemulsions are sometimes called self-emulsified systems or solubilized oils, things like that. Microemulsion is formed spontaneously and is stable permanently by using a lot of surfactant. So if you put so much surfactant into the water that it's no longer really water, it's this pretty serious solution of a lot of surfactants, and the surfactants typically would need to be pretty strong, harsh. You can't really get away with a lot of food grade stuff when you do this, or at least not very organic or natural for sure. Another name for this that many people are familiar with is micellar suspension. I think micelles is typically how you say it. So there's so much surfactant that the oil just solubilizes into water. And it could be this kind of a bicontinuous thing, not necessarily droplets. Or it could be droplets with a lot of surfactants still present in your water. And it could be a combination of both, which is more typical. Now, the advantages of this is that this actually makes the oils behave as if they were water soluble. It gives you the advantages that, let's say, alcohol does as a bioactive. It acts much quicker, the bioavailability goes up. The problem is the surfactants are harsh. They typically don't taste very good. They're bitter and soapy and all that. And there's an obscene amount of these surfactants. And that's because in order to make these small droplets, you use the chemical energy, which is the surfactants and their presence. So you drive this process to formation of the solubilized oil by using a lot of surfactant, and once you're done, you can't remove the surfactant. It's in your system. You're stuck with it. It's the only way it's going to be stable. So the pharma industry used this method because, well, I mean, if you're dying of a disease and you have to take a drug, and it has a lot of surfactant, that's the least of your problems, right? So the pharma can kind of afford to give you these, bad tasting things and harsh things. But if you're doing this in the cannabis industry and it's not a life or death, you just want to consume some cannabis in a pleasant way, this really doesn't have a lot of future. Another formulation to talk about is liposomal suspension. So liposomes are mentioned in different contexts by many people, and sometimes correctly, but frequently incorrectly. So liposomes are great. They're just not for oil and water formulations. Liposomes have water on their interior. Then they have a phospholipid bilayer, much like our cells. And oils can go into this kind of a oily layer, but obviously this is not to scale. So the internal area is large. The skin, or this bilayer, is very thin, and outside you again have water. So if you're going to put oils in there, the loading factor is going to be very low. You can put just a very little bit into this. So typically that's not what to do, okay? But they're great for controlled delivery of water-soluble substances. A typical thing is vitamin C, the simplest. Vitamin C happens to be extremely bioavailable. If you consume it, it'll just go right in. So much so that your body will eliminate it, and then you're going to have a vitamin C deficiency. It's weird, right? So to slow it down, you can put it inside a liposome, and then it can't immediately get absorbed because it has to get through this oil environment, and vitamin C is water-soluble. That's why it acts so quickly. But it's going to have some trouble getting through this membrane, and so that slows it down. And lots of other things are like this. For example, chemotherapy agents. You can put chemotherapy agents in the middle here, put recognition proteins into the bilayer, such that when you put it in your bloodstream, the liposomes will find the target organ, get stuck to it, and only there will the chemotherapy come out. This is new cancer treatment. So liposomes are great, just not really for cannabis. Which brings us to nanoemulsions. So nanoemulsions combine the advantages of all of this stuff without the disadvantages. They are spherical droplets with oil on the inside. Typically, good ones are, and I'll talk about nanoemulsions throughout this talk, so I'll mention it again, but typically 25 nanometers is a good size. If you're anywhere below 100 nanometers, you're still really good. And below 250 nanometers, it gives you a lot of improvements. So somewhere between 250 and 100 nanometers, you're still in a good place. But they have a minimal, just enough surfactant to be on the surface, and not much of it is in the aqueous phase. Now, the requirements for surfactants are much more relaxed. They can be food grade, they could be organic, they could be natural. It's a little harder to formulate, but once you formulate, these things are very stable, and they can be very mild and tasteless. But there's a catch, like always. You don't use chemistry to propel this process forward to make them. You use equipment. You use typically an ultrasound processor that needs to break the droplets mechanically. Unless you break them, the surfactant there is not sufficient and not the right type to separate the droplets into smaller droplets. But it will maintain them if they're formed. So if you use ultrasound to make the droplets, the surfactant instantly finds its way onto its surface and maintains them stable. Okay? And I'm going to talk about the equipment. These are some functional parts of ultrasonic equipment of different scales, and I'll talk about this a little bit more. So the advantages of using the mechanical energy, vibration, to chemical energy to get there is that once you turn your system off, the sonicator, the energy is no longer there. Unlike the surfactants, you can't turn them off once you put them in there. They're going to stay. Okay? So we're going to focus on nanoemulsions for the remainder of the talk. Now let's talk a little bit more about what exactly they are. So typically, a good one would be a droplet of about 20 to 40 nanometers in size, spherical, oil, a carrier oil, let's say, with your cannabinoids, THC, CBD, what have you, or another type of bioactive that dissolves in oil. are on the inside, water is on the outside. They are separate from each other. They don't agglomerate, they don't separate. They remain stable well over a year without any problems. We have some we made 3 years ago and they're still stable. So again, a carrier oil, typically a long chain triglyceride, not an MCT, not medium chain triglyceride. There are reasons for it. I can get into them if you'd like. It's a little lengthy, but so long chain triglyceride, olive oil, coconut oil, whatever, vegetable oils are good. A bioactive, your cannabis extract. It doesn't have to be an individual cannabinoid. It could be a full spectrum extract, a broad spectrum. Absolutely doesn't matter. As long as it dissolves in the carrier oil, you can do it. You can formulate this way. Surfactants. Typically, there's less surfactant than the oil in this formulation, so that's a good ratio. Water on the outside, and if you're making a powder, water could be replaced at some point with something that happens to be solid at room temperature, but has properties of water. Let's say a sugar derivative of some kind, right? So sugar and water are very compatible. They have lots of things in common. They have hydrogen bonds that they can form with each other and whatnot. But they're solid at room temperature. So if you have your dispersion of droplets in a sugar matrix, and you have that in the powdered form, once you put that powder into water, the sugar dissolves out, the droplets are released, and now you're back to your, liquid beverage. It's a good way to package it because then you're not, transporting water from place to place. If you formulate powders, it's easier to administrate. You can make sublingual tablets. You can make quick disintegrating tablets. Powders are really good as long as you can maintain your droplets at the right size and stable when you're making it. Some preservatives sometimes are put in, depending on what you're going to do. Let's say if it's a tincture and you're going to open it and close it all the time, eventually fungus is going to get in from the air, and then the fungus, just like us, it loves this stuff, yeah? So it's going to grow in there. Preservatives help. And so again, for it to qualify as a nanoemulsion, the droplets have to all be smaller than 250 nanometers. Well, no, this is not all droplets, the median of the distribution. Let's say roughly the average, not exactly, but somewhere on top of the distribution. That has to be lower than 250 nanometers. That makes it a nanoemulsion. When the median is much smaller than 100 nanometers, nanoemulsions become translucent. And that's because the particles are smaller than the shortest visible wave, light wave, which is violet. About 400 nanometers is the wavelength. So when an obstacle to a wave is smaller than about a quarter of that wave, the wave goes unobstructed basically. It kind of goes around and recombines and continues. So 400 nanometers is the shortest visible light. When droplets are all smaller than 100 nanometers, which happens when the D50, the median, is much smaller than 100, they become not really an obstruction for the light, and so it starts to travel through the formulation and becomes translucent, okay? And it's convenient because you can kind of tell roughly where your droplets are without having to measure them. And you also know, did you run the process this time as successfully as last time? Well, you can see the translucency of it. You don't have to really measure unless you want the real number. And you can monitor stability. If it's getting cloudy, something's happening. Now, sometimes, especially in Europe, it comes up that nanotechnology is maybe dangerous, right? And so that's true in certain cases. Metal oxides, carbon nanotubes, or new nanoparticles require a lot of scrutiny. But maybe nanotechnology as a word is new, but nano-formulations are not new. This is English breakfast tea. It's a perfect nanoemulsion, 25 nanometer droplet size if you just measure it. This is McDonald's coffee. The coffee itself is not great, but the droplet size distribution is excellent. So this is 100. It's about 82 is the median about here. So it's an excellent nanoemulsion. Our blood, our gastric fluids, most foods have something of a nanoemulsion in them. So I wouldn't be scared of nanoparticles necessarily. And these are nanoemulsions you can make with cannabis extracts. So just to compare the particle size distribution. This is your English breakfast tea, 25 nanometers. This is a good, in this case, CBD nanoemulsion, 25.8 nanometers, similar droplet size distribution, translucent in appearance. Same could be with other cannabinoids and other bioactives. This is a premium powder. Once you take the powder, it looks, well, like a powder, and you reconstitute it in water. The droplets are released. You measure them, so we're getting down to about 35. It's a little harder to make them smaller than that, but 35 is a perfectly good nanoemulsion, so you can make powdered products and beverages. Now, besides cannabis, it's really worth talking about other things. So in the context of this show, mushroom alkaloids. In general, alkaloids are many things. I would say maybe most bioactives are alkaloids. So this is piperine, and we formulate, piperine is black pepper extract. It's good for increasing the bioavailability of other things, and well, for lots of other things. It's tough to formulate, it doesn't dissolve in oil. So you have to find a carrier that is close to an oil. It can't really be an oil, and there's some challenges to formulate it, but well, we've gotten down to below 2 nanometers for it, so it actually is playing ball really well. This is Kratom. So mitragynine nanoemulsion, 45 nanometers for this formulation, but in the past, well, since I made this presentation, we've made progress, and now Kratom or mitragynine nano-formulations are a lot more like piperine. They're at the very, very low nanometer range. They're completely clear. Even their taste is not bad, and they're perfectly stable. So this has been, I would say, somewhat of a breakthrough in this. I believe you're going to see a lot of good, stable, good tasting Kratom beverages in the near future. Now, staying with mitragynine a little bit, there are beverages made with mitragynine now. Mitragynine is the active in Kratom, right? And everything I say about Kratom probably applies, at least to some extent, to mushroom alkaloids, including psilocybin, most likely, and other non-psychoactive alkaloids. So you can actually dissolve mitragynine in water if you make it acidic. It's an alkaloid, and so it can be converted into a salt. And you can't really get to very high concentrations, but you can get 3.5 milligrams per milliliter this way. So acidic beverages are sometimes produced with mitragynine. But the thing about it is that mitragynine becomes unstable. It dissolves, but is unstable in acidic environments. So if you made that, you need to drink it right away. You can't really make a product and keep it on the shelf like that. In 6 hours, 10% is gone, so in a couple of days, it's all dead, okay? So the way to do it is to actually go the other way, high pH, and make it hydrophobic, not water soluble, but as oil soluble as you can. Put it in the carrier oil and make a nanoemulsion out of it, and that keeps it stable, gives it behavior as if it were water soluble, but maintains it shelf stable basically indefinitely. With the new formulation that I mentioned, but I don't have the data on in this presentation, that's actually not a requirement. You can have acidic beverages if you'd like, and mitragynine stays stable in those types of formulations. It's isolated from the acids. So just to quickly mention, if you have an HPLC or any kind of a liquid chromatography unit, let's say Orange Photonics. Orange Photonics makes these really nice, simple liquid chromatography devices. They fit in a small suitcase. They're made only for cannabinoids, but you can actually measure mitragynine on them. You just need to change the mobile phase, and so this is what we did. This is a mitragynine standard, and this is one of the formulations that we made. So this is mitragynine, and this is probably some surfactants showing up in other places. But just to mention that you don't necessarily need very complicated, expensive, sophisticated equipment to do this if you decide to do it. Now, I think this is probably the main and the only remaining sciencey slide. It's important to talk about why. Why is it that when things are water soluble or behave as if they're water soluble, why is it that the bioavailability is increased? Why is the onset of action faster? What's wrong with edibles? Why do edibles hit you 2 hours later? And why is it so unpredictable with edibles? And why are water soluble things like alcohol are so predictable, reproducible, quick to act and whatnot? Well, so this is why. When you consume an oil, triglycerides, fat, the oils arrive in your small intestine. They have to get through your stomach. Nothing gets absorbed in the stomach except alcohol a little bit, but oils don't. And so they arrive in your small intestine, kind of like a blob, a big drop, let's say. Now, for them to get absorbed, they have to migrate to the inner wall of the small intestine, where you have enterocyte cells, which will absorb them into the bloodstream or into the lymphatic fluid. That's a whole other topic, actually, to discuss. But they have to be at the wall to get in. Now, the walls of our small intestines are lined with what's called unstirred aqueous layer. It's basically water-based mucus that is not stirring, it's quiet, and it prevents oils from getting across because they're not water-soluble. It's done deliberately because then your body has a way of controlling what's going on. And so what your body does is it sends lipases, which are enzymes that will convert triglycerides into free fatty acids. They will clip the glycerin group, make free fatty acids. It doesn't really matter what exactly that means, but oil is still an oil. It's an oil in different form. Also, phospholipids that we just internally generate and bile salts act like surfactants, will also be generated. They will all come to this area. And free fatty acids with the surfactants that your body produces will form what's called mixed micelles. Mixed micelles are droplets of oil and water with surfactant on the surface of about 10 to 30 nanometers in diameter. If you have cannabinoids or something that dissolves in oil that you consumed with it, they will find their way to the interior of these droplets because they like to dissolve in oil. That's why everyone knows that an edible works better on a full stomach if you ate something fatty. On an empty stomach, it might not even hit, right? So you need to eat something oily or fatty with it, right? So this is why. Once the droplets are formed, and there's no instance when they're formed, they start being formed when this stuff arrives. But they're formed continuously for a long time. So once a droplet is formed, now it's small enough that it can travel through water. It's very close to, in size to a molecule. Brownian motion alone, just thermal motion of small things, is enough to help it migrate. And so now they find their way to the interior of the small intestine. And at that interior, you have enterocyte cells. So this is a cell in your small intestine that is responsible for absorbing things into your ultimately bloodstream. It has what's called microvilli, little hairs on its surface. These are 100 nanometers, extremely tiny in diameter, and the space between them is also about 100 nanometers. So for things to be properly absorbed, they have to fit in between here. That takes advantage of the entire surface area. If you come up with like this enormous drop, even if it could make it across, you wouldn't really absorb it very efficiently. But these small droplets, they all fit, and that's why it seems that 100 nanometers is a really kind of is a size that below which the absorption just takes off. Individual molecules of things that truly dissolve are much smaller than all this, so they fit beautifully. These types of droplets also fit beautifully. Droplets that are, let's say, 60, 50 nanometers will also fit. But if you are, let's say, half a micron, 500 nanometers, then you are again an edible. You have to wait to be converted into these small droplets by that process. Okay, that's why macroemulsions don't work for this, but microemulsions do and nanoemulsions do. And that's because a nanoemulsion is basically this. Now, the kind of the key to all this is as follows. This process is lengthy and smeared. It takes an hour for it to get going properly. After an hour, if you consume the nanoball, you'll start feeling something. After an hour and a half, maybe you think you didn't take enough. Then you take a second dose, and then you're hitting an asteroid like a NASA rocket, right? But even then, this is still happening. So 3 hours later, 4 hours later, you're at your peak, but then the peak kind of passes, but then more stuff is still coming in. You're eliminating whatever is in your bloodstream, what was there early on, but more is coming in. So you got this very delayed, very smeared peak that sometimes you wake up and you're still high if it's THC and you took it, too late. And that's not what people necessarily want, right? Plus, you can't really titrate your dose. You have to wait for a very long time. So digestive absorption of common edibles is problematic. But if you had a nanoemulsion, you skip all that. You're ready to go. You'll administer it. It just has to get through your stomach. So if you're on a very full stomach, maybe it has to wait its turn to empty into your small intestine, but that's short anyway. It's minutes versus hours, right? Once it's there, it can travel, it gets absorbed all together, like a shot, right? And so here's some data. Unfortunately, I was really hoping that I could bring the most recent data that is almost ready, but not quite. And so it didn't make it for this talk. For next year, I'll have it and more. So I don't have like the very rigorous preclinical data. But I have its analog in a less rigorous, but very kind of revealing way. So this is not extremely precise, but it shows the trends, which is good enough, I think, for like a general conversation, not maybe so much for a paper, a journal paper, right? So what do we have here? So this line, I guess is purple or whatever this color is, blue. Let's call it blue. So this is a THC dose taken by 10 volunteers, 10 milligrams, as an MCT oil solution, basically mimicking a typical edible. So you can see, and this is how high they were self-reporting. This is time, averaged and processed for some statistical analysis was done on this. So for the first couple hours, you feel nothing, almost nothing. And then, well, it wasn't also a very high dose, right? Then after that, it starts to go up, and after about 3.5 hours, like a normal edible would do, you got your peak, and then it starts to dissipate, and then it just keeps going for a long time. There's this long tail, like a normal edible. This is the edible, the same thing, on an empty stomach. Interestingly, it's a little faster to initially go in, and that's because you got nothing that's competing to going, for being absorbed. But it's very little, it's very inefficient. These things are slightly water soluble, so that's enough to maybe give you a tiny little bump. Then it goes away, and it would have gone away completely. And we have data that shows that it would have gone away completely. But we felt sorry for all these poor hungry people because, I mean, on an empty stomach and they've taken an edible, it's really cruel. They get munchies. And so we allowed them to eat, and look what happened. This was unintentional, but very revealing. After 2 hours, they ate, and there's a bump. And that's because all that stuff was still there. It was just waiting for something to help it along, basically supporting the previous slide, right? So then they got their bump, then it's out. Now look what happens with nanoemulsions. This is a nanoemulsion, the green line, on an empty stomach. It's basically a glass of wine. This is about half an hour. In 15 minutes, you're feeling it. Really, you can tell very well. And some people can tell in 3 minutes. Most people in about 7 minutes, I would say. Half an hour, it's fully on. Then it stays flat, which is beautiful because now you can titrate your dose. If you think you didn't take enough, we'll take some more, right? Like you can with wine. Like I shouldn't have done with wine yesterday, but yeah. Stays flat. After about a couple hours, it starts to go out. After 4 hours, it's gone. again, like wine. On a full stomach, it's a little bit delayed, and that's because to get into the small intestine, you have to wait your turn to empty into the small intestine. You're sitting in the stomach with lots of other things. And then maybe there's a little bump. I'm not sure how, this data is not exactly precise, so I don't know if this was actually higher. It seemed like it was a little bit, and it's unclear exactly why. But the pattern is about the same. It goes in a little bit later, it stays relatively flat, it goes out a little slower, but in a way, it's food independent, okay? And it's important to kind of remember that, because it's not like alcohol. Alcohol on an empty stomach hits you a lot more, right? So there's some differences. The nanoemulsions are not exactly water soluble, and that's why in my title I put it in quotes. It's water soluble, but it's water soluble. It behaves as if it were, but technically it's not. So on the full stomach, it would hit you a little more probably, and be maybe a little bit delayed, that's all. This is a very elegant study done with another bioactive, not by us. It was I think a pharmaceutical company that did it, where they administered nanoemulsions orally with different droplet sizes to show what happens when you change the droplet size in nanoemulsion, basically illustrating what I was saying about microvilli and how you fit in between. So this is 400 nanometers, basically inedible. Doesn't really improve anything because, well, it's kind of water soluble, but really it's just really, it's water, I guess. It can exist in a beverage in some way, but it's not close to water soluble. It doesn't behave as if it were water soluble. It doesn't fit in between microvilli and separates. So it's down here. This is what happens when you're at about 150 or 200 or so. There's an improvement, but a big improvement happens when you're at 60 or in this case 40 nanometers. Then you start to really fit well in between the microvilli and get absorbed efficiently. This is 40, this is 25. You don't get a great, huge improvement. So at this point, if you fit, you fit, basically. It's good enough. So this is also good to know. And as I mentioned quickly, translucency goes up when the droplet size decreases. So this is the same formulation, we just continued processing it. This is 170 nanometers, it's milky. This is 49. So 49 is the top of it, but there's a little bit of a tail to it, so some of the droplets are bigger than 100, and that makes it cloudy. And then this is 34, 31, you can basically see through it very well. Same formulation, nothing changed, concentrations are the same, it just clears up because the droplets are small. Okay, now we come down to basically the point for many people, actually, the question, how can I make my own? So my company, Industrial Sonar Mechanics, as a big part of what we do is enable our clients to make their own without having to be chemists or engineers. We make it simple. There are simple operating procedures, standardized, that anyone can follow. And the solution consists of two parts. One is an ultrasound system. This is the business end of it. I'll talk a little bit more about these. So this is a flow through. This particular one is a medium scale ultrasound system. Your formulation is here. It's being recirculated and processed as you go along. We offer three types: lab, bench, and industrial scale. They all produce identical results, just the productivity changes. They're directly scalable, and I'll explain how that works. And the other side of the puzzle is the formulation. So in order for our customers to not have to formulate their own, and they can if they want to, obviously we provide equipment to anyone who wants it. You can have your own formulation, and many people do, but I would say most people prefer to have something already worked out. It's basically like ink for a printer. It's a native ink that works really well with this printer. So I guess this would be a printer. This is ink. We offer all-in-one nanostabilizer formulations. They come in containers from small like this to much larger containers depending on what you're doing. And there are two types. Nanostabilizer LT leads to liquid translucent nano-formulations. That's why it says LT, it's liquid translucent, it's not very complicated. Our nomenclature is very simple. LSP is lab scale system, BSP is bench scale, like that. The other nanostabilizer is nanostabilizer LSO. It makes liquid or solid opaque formulations. This is the nanostabilizer LSO. So you can make a liquid nanoemulsion, or you could choose to dry it on a spray dryer, let's say, or we offer our own methods for drying as well. And so if you dry those, then you make powdered nanoemulsions. So all this comes with standard operating procedures, so you don't have to make any decisions really. Very briefly to mention the productivities. So the lab scale system, when it's fully set up in the flow-through mode, can make about 1 liter of nanoemulsion per hour. A typical concentration, a good one, would be 50 milligrams per milliliter. If 10 milligrams is a dose, that equates to 5,000 doses that you can produce in 1 hour. So enough concentrate to dose 5,000 units of your beverage, let's say. The bench scale system is 25,000, so 5 times faster. The industrial system is 100,000 doses an hour. You can make 20 liters of nanoemulsion. Typically uses a big tank that you would recirculate from through the system. And this is the business end of it. It consists of an ultrasound horn. This is a barbell horn. It's important for the horn to be barbell based because that lets you scale up and maintain the intensities. I'll focus on that next in this presentation. This is a reactor chamber, or flow cell, people call it. So the liquid comes in here, comes out of here, and recirculates through it. This is a water-cooled transducer, what converts electrical signal coming from your generator to mechanical vibrations. So this is how you control everything. I didn't bring the generator, but it has all kinds of controls on it, lots of flexibility. You can set your amplitude at whatever level you'd like, and it'll maintain it no matter what, no matter how your load changes. Cruise control, basically. It understands the resonance frequency for your system, no matter what the temperature is, and it always changes. But the equipment understands to lock onto it and travel with it, so you're always on resonance. Everything is automatic. You push a button, and it takes care of itself. And then you stop it when you're done. Okay. And we offer full transparency on our pricing and configurations. So we have this page on our website where you can select a system. Let's say in this case it's an LSP in flow-through mode, and you get your price right away. You can turn things on and off. If you have your own magnetic stirrer, you don't need one from us. You turn it off, the price changes right away, right? So you can configure your system. This is a sorry, that was in the batch mode. This is in the flow-through mode. So we have a pretty useful reservoir with a mixer. Mixers typically get stuck. Magnetic stirrers get stuck. The stirrer gets stuck in sticky oils. So it helps to have a shaft and whatnot. So you can choose it or not if you have your own. This is a VSP in the flow-through mode. Again, you can click things on and off. The next system is the ISP. Oh, first the batch mode. So batch mode is important for the medium scale system. If you don't want to work with 20 liters at a time, maybe you just want to try something, you can use our smaller system. But if you sometimes want to produce and sometimes try, then you have this batch mode capability. It's basically a horn like this. So the flow-through arrangement would be like this. You take this chamber off, replace the barbell horn with this one, and now you can put it in the beaker and work with small amounts. We offer jacketed beakers like that. You can also do it with the large system. We offer jacketed beakers where you can process a couple of liters, and if you are happy with the way it's working out, you go to flow-through mode and process 100 liters if you like. Typically it's 50 liters at a time. or so. So it's very simple. I'm gonna show you how this comes off. So this kind of shows you what's inside. This is a large-scale, high-amplitude horn. You can use it in this flow cell, or you can just take all this off. You can even keep the lid on, it doesn't bother, and put it in a smaller beaker and process a little bit at a time. Now, how does this work? I really like explaining how it works. I think it's super cool. Why does ultrasound create these crazy, extremely high shear forces that break particles into nanoparticles? Well, for that we need to talk about what cavitation is. So cavitation comes up in different contexts. You can create cavitation with other methods. Arguably, ultrasound creates the most intense and the most easily controlled type of cavitation. So let's say you take a syringe, plug the hole, so the liquid doesn't come out or air doesn't go in, and pull the plunger back. What will happen is you will make basically vacuum bubbles in there because you've increased the volume. No air came in to fill that volume, so it's more or less empty vacuum bubbles. If you let go of the plunger, it'll fly in and the bubbles will collapse very quickly, right? If you're not just releasing the plunger but actually push on it, they'll collapse much quicker. So this is a very kind of slow and exaggerated and very oversimplified way of showing what happens when you have a vibrating horn. So this is basically this horn, right? This is how it vibrates. So you vibrate it with the transducer at its input with a low amplitude. Transducers can't on their own produce high amplitudes. The job of this device is to amplify the amplitude so you can see how much more it travels. The amplitude is basically the distance between fully extended and fully retracted position, right? So it'll amplify the amplitude and deliver this mechanical vibration to the liquid in which this thing is immersed, either in a batch mode or in a flow-through scenario. Now, this happens 20,000 times a second, really quickly. And the amplitude is high, not visible with the naked eye, it's measured in microns. So a very high amplitude is 100 microns. It has nothing to do with the droplets you're going to make, or rather, it has to do with the droplets you're going to make because that shows the intensity, but not the micron size of it. So 100 microns is a huge distance for these kinds of devices. Typical simple devices, or like a cleaning bath, like a jewelry cleaner bath, that's about 3 microns in there. So, and it can already do something. So obviously, 100 microns is a lot more intense and typically not necessary. Typically you operate at about 80 microns or so, 75 sometimes. That's a good setting for a horn like this. But so now look what happens. It's in the liquid, let's say, right? You pull up, or well, it retracts. It happens so quickly that the inertia of the liquid outside of the immediate area where this was doesn't have time to come in. So you're actually at the syringe situation. It's as if there were some walls there. So you're forming vacuum bubbles. And then on the forward stroke, you're very quickly collapsing those bubbles. And it happens so quickly that within each bubble, there's always a little gas, a little vapor. You actually cross the sound barrier. The wall of each bubble travels faster than the speed of sound. And when that happens, you get shock waves. Shock waves is the reason that Concorde is no longer flying, right? Because things would happen, like buildings would get damaged when it was crossing the sound barrier, right? Up in the air. So this is what happens throughout your liquid, 20,000 times a second or so, in an extremely intense way. This is the nanoemulsion. This is what cavitation looks like. This is actually a video, the bottom of this horn. And it consists of these bubbles that on the upstroke will grow. Some vapor maybe will leak into them, but mostly they're empty. On the reverse stroke, They will collapse like this, create a shock wave, and one wall will pierce the other. And this is a microjet. Tiny micron-size microjet created by the liquid itself, so you don't need any grinding balls like bead milling has, or any gears or anything like that. It's the liquid itself, water in this case, that creates microjets that hit a bubble of oil and a droplet of oil and splits it. Okay. Now, scale up. Scale up is an extremely important thing to keep in mind. So, our company was formed around the invention of what we call the barbell horn. The barbell horn is something that allows you to increase the amplitude and not have to decrease the diameter of the horn at the same time. Conventional technology doesn't allow for that. So you can have a small horn, like we were talking about yesterday. In the small sonicator, you can create high amplitudes, and you can optimize your processes, cell disruption for, let's say, mushrooms extraction, or nanoemulsification, or many other things. You can create high amplitudes and optimize your process in the lab. But with conventional technology, if you want to scale that up, and that requires a larger horn, you lose the amplitude. So your vibration, from 100 microns, let's say, goes down to 20. And this is, with conventional technology, for large devices, this is about as high as you can get, and that's not enough to do anything meaningful. You won't be able to, especially for mushrooms. Actually, this was news to me. I didn't know that the mushroom walls were so strong, and it's actually really good for us in a way, because you need high amplitudes for that. So if you scale up with conventional technology, you basically have to give up on most processes. This gave ultrasound this bad reputation of not being scalable, but the barbell horn technology allows you to scale up. So you can maintain the same amplitude with this horn and just increase the volumes that you're processing per unit of time, get the same behavior in each milliliter, let's say, of liquid, experiences the same conditions. It's just there are more milliliters being processed at a time. So this is what a flow-through lab scale system looks like, a small little flow cell that you can easily take off and use it in a batch mode. This is actually even easier. It's just a tri-clamp attachment. So this is typically used for optimization of very small scale production of samples, let's say. This is the bench scale. It's used for light production. THC people prefer this because you can transport across state lines, so they have to produce locally more or less. CBD people and Delta 8 people typically prefer this because you can actually ship it. But Delta 8 maybe not always, not everywhere, but in many places you can. So for mushrooms, let's say, if it's not psilocybin, it's probably going to be something like this. That's more popular, we're hoping. This is published work, exactly how this gets scaled up. And the scale-up factor you can expect from this technology is about 60. So if you could do something and it would take you an hour before, or maybe you, if you could do it and it took you an hour, with this system it'll take you a minute. That would be scale-up by a factor of 60. But typically it more works the other way. It's like if you could only do 10 milliliters in a certain amount of time, this will increase that 10 milliliter by a factor of 60. So now you can do 600 milliliters in the same amount of time. Okay? A little bit about nanostabilizers. This is nanostabilizer LT. It looks like a cream. It very quickly and easily melts, and your cannabis formulation will dissolve into it. It's mostly a carrier oil, so whatever dissolves in oils will also dissolve in this nanostabilizer. So to use it, you just take nanostabilizer in a certain ratio. I'll talk about ratios in a minute. You put your CBD, THC, full spectrum extract, whatever, rosin. Rosins are great. You just need to get rid of the cell walls and stuff like that. Just as long as it's all oil soluble, you can use it. Dissolve it in this, put it in water in the tank of the processor, start recirculating it, turn the ultrasound on, let it be until it's translucent. Or if you're measuring, preferably the droplet size, until you're happy with the droplet size. Or you could just go by time and translucency. It's fine for this formulation. Everything is derived from natural sources. very food grade, and very importantly, completely tasteless. This doesn't introduce or remove flavor. So if your extract was bitter, it'll be bitter. If your extract wasn't bitter, which mostly is wishful thinking, there always are a little bit bitter. So that's gonna end up being like that in the final formulation. But the surfactants themselves don't contribute anything to taste. Ratios 5:1 of surfactant to oil, of nanostabilizer to oil, gets you to full translucency. Very small droplet size, 27 nanometers. At about 3:1, it gets a little bit milky, I would say, but once you dose it, it's still mostly clear. Maybe you detect it in there, but it's clear enough for many people. Now, if you get down below 2:1, your upper edge of the distribution, the right end, starts to get close to 200 nanometers. So if you're below that, you're above 200 nanometers, and that's the problem because typically you need to sterile filter these things. It's just easier to process in a non-sterile environment, not aseptically, and sterilize it by filtration in the end. You pass it through a filter, you got rid of all your microbial contamination. So you can't do it when some of the droplets will clog the filter, and the filter is 220 nanometers in pore size. So we recommend staying above 3:1 typically. Most people just go with 5:1. Stability of these formulations. So as far as the droplet size, physical stability, separation, that can last for years, and it does in most cases. Now, stability of cannabinoids in this formulation. So in this particular case, it's CBD. So this is more than half a year, and it's completely stable. And we're still measuring, and it's still stable, and it's been, I think, a year and a half by now. Now, if you keep it in a dark glass container, it remains stable. In a clear glass container, after a period of time, it actually starts to get oxidized by light. It has nothing to do with the fact that it's not emulsified. It's just cannabinoids don't do well with light. It's actually pretty impressive that it lasts about half a year before that happens. But this wasn't in direct light. It was just sitting in the corner of a lab. This is nanostabilizer LSO. It itself is a powder. So it's a powder. So you can't really dissolve an oil into that. The SOPs, standard operating procedures, are a little bit more complex for it. But you start with this, you put it in water, and then you add your oil to that. Then you process it. Then you can spray dry it or otherwise dry it, make a powder. Now this formulation is even milder. Here it says that organic is an option. So now we just always make it organic. It's natural, organic, completely tasteless, very easy to use. I also have to mention that we can make nano-formulations for our clients, and we do. So we make products like this with nanostabilizer LT or LSO, basically finished nanoemulsions. And we have another formulation which is nanostabilizer LST. We don't offer it in the form of nanostabilizer. We use it internally, but it is something that leads to premium powders, the type of powder that I showed in the beginning of this presentation. Very small droplet sizes, goes completely clear in water. Looks like this. And the distribution is very narrow and centered at about 35 nanometers. A question that sometimes comes up is, if it's bitter, well, first of all, why is it bitter? And what can I do with it, about it, right? So the bitterness in general, not for our formulations, but in general, could come from your bioactive. In most cases it does. It could be, it is necessarily amplified when you make it behave as if it were water soluble. It's the bioavailability situation. If you increase the bioavailability of your CBD, let's say, you also increase its access to your taste buds. So if it can dissolve in your saliva effectively, you can taste it more. So you can put some isolate on your tongue, maybe you don't taste much. Nano-emulsify it and you will. You kind of have to keep that in mind. Or the bitterness could come from your formulation. So what can you do about that? Well, clean up your extract, remove the waxes, definitely winterize. Non-winterized things shouldn't be used. They're extremely bitter and difficult to work with. So at least winterize. The more you clean the stuff that doesn't belong, the better. It also turns out that if you leave things in the formulations, like terpenes, they help. They put it for your brain in context. That's why these things are really good in beer as well. Beers, like your brain sometimes somehow thinks that beer is supposed to be a little bitter, so it doesn't bother you. It's not weird. You don't feel like somebody put something that doesn't belong, like it would in water. So clean it up, but perhaps leave some things in there, make the extract attractive. Use a formulation that's tasteless, like one of ours. And you could, well, also make sure you're not using concentrates. Like tinctures are probably not a good idea. Why not just put it in some water and dilute it, right? And if you must, you can use a bitter blocker. I don't know of any bitter blockers that are perfect. There are some bitter blockers that work in some cases. We offer our own as well. It's not perfect. It does work in some cases. Other bitter blockers work in other cases, so it's a bit more complicated. Or you can also flavor it, put it in context. Let's say hops flavor is great for bitterness because it makes you think that bitterness is not a problem because hops would be bitter. Or choose a beverage that's naturally bitter. Coffee is also like that. In coffee, you almost don't perceive it. And with this, I thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Yes.
I don't know how much you can elucidate on it, but the MCT versus the long-term triglycerides.
Yeah.
Just
Sure.
about why.
Yeah, so the question is, why as a carrier oil should you be using a long-chain triglyceride and not a medium-chain triglyceride? It's because some of this pathway, well, actually, let me dial it back. When you're making a nanoemulsion, using MCTs is actually not always a problem. But if you're not sure that your nanoemulsion is going to be of very high quality, let's say it's not quite a macroemulsion, but it's on the way of being a nanoemulsion, but not quite. Let's say it's 200 nanometers or so, which is true in many cases. Then some of the pathway is actually this natural pathway that I showed with edibles. You make mixed micelles, besides the fact that the droplets themselves are able to travel. On their way, they convert it into mixed micelles, which helps them fit into this microvilli. With MCT, the micelles end up being too small, and CBD molecules just don't fit, or they don't fit efficiently. So the loading factor goes down. You can't really transport what you need to. MCT itself gets absorbed beautifully, but it leaves some of the stuff it's supposed to transport behind. So we made it a rule just not to even worry about it. Always just use LCTs. Another thing is MCT-based nanoemulsions are a little bit less stable. There's something called Ostwald ripening that over time will affect the stability of your nanoemulsions. It doesn't happen with LCTs. LCTs actually help you stabilize otherwise unstable nanoemulsions. So that'll do it.